We're going to continue with sort of an overview of the various domains that we started in this last session. And what I'm doing with 2 sessions is sort of giving you where I'm at in my thinking now. And there are question marks on each one of these overheads because where I'm at in my thinking is nowhere near complete with what the Bible has to share, or even what my process will be. I forgot to read the mission statement for government in the first session. I think I read the one for the ecclesiastical structure, so let me give you that now. A mission statement. What am I called to do if I'm called to serve as a civil servant or as someone in government? What is the primary function of that? We could say that it is to provide and ensure justice and equity for all citizens, including the executive, judicial, military, enforcement, and central services. And so your mission mandate, if God has called you into law, into public service in an office of some kind, or as a civil servant, into the tax office, into any one of these dimensions of government, your primary function is to, within the scope of your authority, make sure justice at the highest level possible is being extended to citizens fairly. Now just imagine if every Christian in the world who worked in the government field had that as their daily objective. It would change nations, just with the Christians that are already in government, who don't know why they're there, who are being unfair to people just like everybody in government because no one's taught them yet that Christians don't do that because God has a different view of justice. Okay. Uganda appointed a year and a half ago or 2 years ago Christians to the taxation office specifically with the hope that would decrease crime and theft within the economic part of the government. And I thought, I hope these Christians have been discipled in this area. Because just appointing Christians doesn't mean today that you get a different way of thinking. You may get exactly the same way of thinking on that issue, but they are saved and do go to church and sometimes put a Jesus sticker on their desk. So what we want to do is make sure those Christians do think differently so that when they have opportunity to serve, they're serving in a way that glorifies God rather than in a way that detracts from their testimony. Okay, we want to finish then just a couple of comments on the area of science and technology. You could say that the view of the Bible is cure and prevention rather than healing oriented. So the emphasis of Scripture is not on healing as a way to solve our problems with disease. The emphasis on Scripture is prevention, and the emphasis is on cures, ways to treat diseases, and healing is a miraculous exception for a particular purpose. But healing is not God's strategy for dealing with disease. And I think you know that. But when I say it like that, I think everyone in evangelicalism would go, well, yeah, of course. But we don't talk like that. We don't act like that's the exception. We get all complicated about the medical community and our interaction with it. You know, it's okay to take an aspirin, but can I take an antidepressant? You know, as though a headache is anatomically different than some other chemical problem within your brain. You know, and we have within our Western cultures a marvelous foundation of a biblical view of the material world, but we don't live nor think like that as Christians anymore. It would be quite scary to have the average Christian in charge or dominating the scientific realm today. I'm afraid we'd be less like the reformers who laid a foundation for science with a biblical view that God orders this world by laws. These laws are discoverable and knowable and applicable. And when discovered, they will be applicable in exactly the same circumstances with exactly the same result in every situation because it's a measurable world. I think we're less like those Christians who actually formed the concept of science, and we're more like the Christians who executed the first scientists that said the world wasn't flat. Are you with me? Because at one time, the church's theology of the material world was that the earth is flat, and the whole world, they didn't invent that. The whole world thought the world was flat at that stage. And when the first scientist, who was a Christian, came out and said, well, no, I think it's probably not flat, it's probably more spherical, they executed the first one and excommunicated and put under house arrest for life the second one. Because you see, this scientific idea messed up their theology of heaven and hell and man being central to the universe. Because if the earth was flat, then heaven was up and hell was down and man was the center of the universe. And the Bible clearly uses that concept of hell up, hell down, heaven up, man the center of the universe. But did the Bible mean geographically the center of the universe? Well, that's not explained, but we can assume that whatever God meant in His Word matches the material world He created. But they said, no, the earth has to be flat because this is our theology, you're dead. And that began an antagonism between the ecclesiastical structure and science that God never intended to exist. And I believe that antagonism is present in the church today, and we are belligerent about discovery. Even though discovery can never take us any way away from God, it can only move us towards a better understanding of what God actually means. Because we can't discover anything God didn't put into place. Are there, let me take an extreme, which is ridiculous, but let's use it. Are there beings on other planets? I don't know. I don't think so. But if they're out there, folks, God already knew it. We have nothing to fear. We don't have to be worried. We don't have to try to know what we don't know. We can know that whatever we finally do know, God knew it before we did. And it will not be inconsistent with His Word. It will not be inconsistent with His character. It cannot be. It can't exist and be inconsistent with its Creator. Okay? So I don't really have a strong opinion about that. It doesn't really make any difference. Whatever we discover, it will fit in God's plan. Whatever we discover, He will have created. Can we clone human beings? I don't know. But if we do, I already know what God's plan and purpose is for that person. Or will you be like the missionaries when we first went to Black Africa? Because the people were so radically different and you didn't understand where they might have come from. We said, do the black people have souls? Are they really people? You see, that was ignorance. We get so accustomed to human beings being in our own image. When we encountered different human beings, we said, hey, do they have souls? And now we go, oh, gee, that's really kind of stupid, isn't it? That was a little ignorant. See? Well, it's just as ignorant to think that if God allows life to come into existence in another way, it is less God. I don't personally think we're going to be able to do it, but if we do, I'm not worrying. Get them saved, get them evangelized, get them discipled. Our mandate is clear. Let God worry about all the other stuff. See? Let's not spend 3 days sitting around debating the ethics of the salvation of a clone. If He allows it, see? We don't have to fear. Okay, so if we were going to work in the area of healthcare, one of the big debates in the world today is it better for our insurance companies to be cure-oriented or prevention-oriented? Well, the Bible is clear on that. Prevention is better than a curative approach to disease. And so if you take that into America today, I think statistics will show economically that the American medical community's obsession with disease to the abstinence of any interest in prevention is creating an economic crisis in this country. That a health approach is more far-thinking than a disease approach, although we will always need cures for diseases, it is better to keep people healthy. Then you can start there in your primary care in a small village. You can start preaching the gospel of prevention from the moment you enter the village. And that will be part of the gospel that you're taking to those people, and you can get them off on the right foot. It is nutrition oriented. Nutrition is just such a vital part of what God was teaching them in Israel. He was teaching them to eat well, and He was teaching them to eat things that would prevent disease. He was teaching them to eat things that had curative potential within them. It is, one doctor that was in the audience when I taught this said that they had discovered that one of the leaves that they offered, that they actually took with the priest when they went with the disease, they have discovered that that leaf actually had a naturally produced penicillin. Now God knew that. The Jews didn't know that yet. It was a mystery to them, but it would become less a mystery, you see, because God doesn't want us to be ignorant. He will help us in our ignorance, but His goal is that we learn the laws by which His material works, that we learn the curative potential of the things that He has made. Sanitation, of course, we touched on. That was an imperative. That Israel practiced community sanitation and personal hygiene. What did they do if they were found unclean? They went outside the camp, they washed, and they waited till night. Because the two best destroyers of germs, if you have not yet discovered, what do you call that? The stuff that, if you don't have soap or you don't have alcohol or one of the things that kills germs, the two best things to destroy germs is washing and time, because germs have a very short lifespan. So why did He say go outside the camp, wash, and wait till night? Because those were the two things that were already existent that they could utilize to prevent infection. Now we have much more that we can offer today to prevent infection, and we should use those things, and we should be teaching people to use those things and why they get sick. This is part of our gospel. This is what Jesus came to proclaim. This is how we keep from getting any of those diseases. And so we want to be a part of developing the health of a community. Environmental stewardship. If we had a week, we could stop here. He taught the Jews in Deuteronomy, if a bird and its young fall out of the nest, you may take the young, you must replace the mother. What do you think He thought? That the species was endangered? He didn't even want species to get close to endangerment. He was teaching them good stewardship of that which He had made and belonged to Him before anything was even in danger of being extinct. And we today go, oh, that environmental stuff, it's just a bunch of new age green people. That's not for Christians. Oh, no. No, the original environmentalist is God. We wouldn't even bother building an ark. See, God toyed with destroying the entire human race. He never toyed with destroying the animal kingdom. Are you with me? He debated whether or not He was going to put any human beings back on planet Earth. But He wanted to safeguard the animal kingdom. And it isn't just the human race that goes on the ark. The ark was built, this magnificent, unbelievable technological construction for that day and age was built specifically to preserve the species He had created. Because they are good. And we have no right to eliminate that God has made. We need to preach it. Francis Schaeffer said in his book on ecology, I cannot remember the title of that book, but it was one of the later things he wrote. He said, when the world discovers the destruction of its material resources, they will come to a point where they blame the church. And they will do it rightly. So, because the church preached prosperity and development without coupling it to stewardship and an appreciation for God's resources, and they will blame us. We're not there yet, but we'll get there. It's all part of the coming debate in regards to resources and economic development in the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere. And this is a huge thing. And when we are blamed, we have to accept it. Because the only hope we have is repentance and changed thinking and the mercy of God, and then trying to become more like Him where we have been less like Him. And we need to care about environment, and we need to teach people in the tribes that they need to care for their animals. God says in the Old Testament, you can judge the character of a man by how he treats his animals. We say, oh, well, never mind about that. Let's move on to the important stuff. No, this is the important stuff. You see, because it's all about what you believe, who you believe God is, and what you believe about what He has made. And you cannot believe that life is sacred because God made it, and the planet is not. Everything that God has made is His. And it is from Him, and to Him, and for Him. And if you want to know if you have a biblical view of the material world, just look at how you treat the things God has given you. I always say to the DTSs, just go look at your room. You want to disciple the nations and reach the world? Well, I suggest you start with your room. And if you take something that God has given you and in a premature time destroy it because you abuse it, because you don't take care of it, because you don't pay any attention to it, that is immoral. You are breaking God's economic and environmental laws. You are being a bad steward. You are not discipled. Okay? And to say that you think life is important and human beings are important, and yet to destroy and to abuse God's material world is a glorious inconsistency. And you don't have a witness. You have a dilemma. You say you are one thing and you act like another. You run out the door with no coat on in freezing weather and say, oh, God will protect me? I don't think so. He'll be God in your face, I guarantee you. And we flaunt the things of God in the material world. And I guarantee you the world that has had very little is going to come back to us and hold it up to us. You want to be a witness? Take care of your body. You want to be a witness? Take care of the things God gives you. One of my greatest testimonies is that I bought a used Jeep 12 years ago and drove it 150,000 miles and changed it every 3,000 miles, and that thing was still humming and looked like new when I sold it 3 months ago in Switzerland. And you know what? My donors wanted to give me more money to get a new car. Do you know why? I took care of the one they gave me last. I was a good steward. Why was I a good steward? Because it is good to do. Because that is a gift of God. I have no right to abuse it and let it be destroyed. That is a waste of God's resources. So look at how you treat the things around you. Look at how you care for the things around you. Evaluate yourself and see, are you a biblical Christian when it comes to a view of the material world? I care whether we have the Amazon rainforest. I am convinced there are preventative medicines in those plants that God created that aren't anywhere else in the world. And I do not think it's right to mow it down, to have beef, to get hardwoods for exotic homes. I think it's wrong. I think it's immoral. I think it's way beyond being unfortunate for the Brazilians. I think it is immoral. I think it destroys the planet. And I may not be able to do anything actively about it, but I can know what I believe, and I can share my conscience with those I come into contact with. And I guarantee you that's a great opener for witnessing to a New Age person. Because all of a sudden we're not alien. We got something in common. I think the animals do talk. I think all of creation talks. I think it's wonderful when we discover how they talk. Have you ever heard the whales sing? Do you know that they change their song every year? And do you know that no matter where they are on the planet, every year they all sing the same song? Even though it's a different song every year? I just think this is phenomenal. I go, God, you are just, this is just a beautiful thing you made. And I rejoice in that. And I don't want that song to be missing from God's harmony in the universe. I believe the universe was created by sound. It is sound materialized. God spoke it into existence. And I think it's tragic when part of God's harmony ceases to exist. And I do not apologize for that. I think this is a great gospel. Do not think it's some sort of secularization of the truly important things of the spiritual domain. I think it is spiritual. Okay, so science, what is their mandate? If you're gifted in science, and you see each of us bears the gifts for the domains we're called for. You know, people that were gifted by God for business can't help but make money. Have you met these people? Everything they do makes money. You think, nothing I do makes money. Yep, you didn't get the gift. But these people, when they're children, they go around and sell things and make money. It goes with it. It's for the territory. There are people who just love nature, who just love butterflies, who just love snakes, who just love insects, who just love DNA and, the thousands of variations. Why do they do that? Because they're made that way. Because God wants us to discover what He has made and learn how to use it. That was not a poor gift that they got because He couldn't use them as an evangelist. See? So science and technology reveals the Creator God, and their mission statement is to discover and use God's laws for the blessing of all people, pursuing a higher standard of living, better health, and better stewardship of the resources of God's creation. That's the mission of science. An engineer is trying to learn to use the laws of God to build things that will be cheaper, longer lasting, a better use of resources, more protective of the environment, more protective of the people who need to use them. More quality to the human life that's going to take place in those structures. What a mandate. I look at some of these houses, I think, gee, that's ugly. And they're expensive ugly. See, it's not cheap, poor ugly, it's no taste ugly. Okay? And you look at what it does to the environment. You see, aesthetics and the use of materials leads to whether we have a beautiful environment where we can be somewhat at peace, that doesn't bring peace, but it adds or detracts from peace. See, and I know that they didn't use architects with any sense of aesthetics because it was cheaper to build houses like this. And I go, ooh, that is so against the glory of God. That is such a misuse of a gift. Would that some Christian architects would come along and use the gifts of God and revelation to incorporate aesthetics and function and economic stewardship. Because it can be done. It's just concern. It's just creativity. It's just interest. And of course, what America does is it builds them not to last so we can tear them all down in 30 years and rebuild something else. And that's great stewardship. Okay, we can't stop here, even though it's so fun to get on your soapbox and just go for it. Let's talk about business, since we're talking about some of those areas. Business, or economics, and the two, business is part of the economic world. The economy is the system by which a nation or a society works, and business is a part of that. Banks are a part of that. The currency is a part of that. Agriculture is a big part of the economic realm. And what economics reveals is Jehovah Jireh, God our provider. See, when we're singing, oh, God our provider, we're not thinking of the God of money. We're thinking of the God of manna that drops out of the sky. But that isn't the primary where God provides, and it never will be. See? But Jehovah Jireh knows our needs and wants to provide for them, and doesn't just want to provide for those who know Him. He wants to provide for everyone so they might know Him. He wants to bless so that blessing may win us and woo us. And a good part of what He motivates Israel with in the wilderness is material blessing. He says, do this. This will be good for you, and it'll be good for you in this way. Health. Be good for you so you can have land, so you can grow food, so you can have what you need. And so it reveals goodness. That is the primary attribute. When the Jews talked about the goodness of God, they were specifically referring to His material blessings. And they would celebrate His goodness by eating and drinking. You know, oh, we are so far from a godly view. You know, once a year, the Jews would take the entire tithe of the land. That's 10% of everything they grew and made. And they would go to Jerusalem, and they would eat and drink it all. See, now preachers don't preach on this anymore, you see, because that's not exactly what they wanted us to be doing with their tithes. But that's what Israel did. Once a year, they would take 10% of everything they'd grown, everything that they made, and if it wasn't food, they would sell it and get currency so they could buy food, and they would literally gather at the temple and eat and drink all of it in this huge festival to God's goodness. I like this, you see, because God is not ashamed to give us good things and to have us celebrate them. He is also not ashamed to allow us to walk through suffering. But suffering is His primary goal. Suffering is used as a means to an end. And so Paul said, I can abase, I can be with nothing, and I can abound. I can celebrate God's discipline. I can celebrate God's provision. And so one of the things I do with my tithe is I take YWAMers, staff of mine generally from all over the world, out to dinner. Big dinners, good dinners, expensive dinners. Because I want them to experience the goodness of God. They're in a tough place. They're in tough circumstances. I want to go out and just celebrate that God is also good. And goodness is celebrated in a material way. And we don't have to worry about that. That doesn't make us less spiritual. It makes us more spiritual. I can give it up. I can have it. I can give it up not because that's God's goal, but sometimes life on planet Earth requires it. It's part of the warfare. It's part of the battle. And I can take it up and enjoy it when He gives it, and I can give it up again. But if you have to be poor to be spiritual, you have no understanding of the goodness of God. You have no understanding of the nature of God. And you have no message for the developing world, I guarantee you. They don't need missionaries with a poverty mentality. Neither do they need missionaries with a health and wealth gospel. Because neither one of them are about the real world. They need missionaries who understand Jehovah Jireh, God the provider. Now I've said, you can see it says God governs and there's nothing there. And that's because I don't know what to call this. I have proposed to the business conferences I've been speaking to that there are laws of economics, and they are basically the same as the laws of farming. And this bears witness to the business professionals I'm speaking to, and that's why they've asked me to come speak in Poland to the agricultural ministers. Because you see, agriculture was the original business. Actually, we have this terrible joke about the first occupation being prostitution, which is not accurate at all. The first occupation was agriculture. So let's get that straightened up. That's just a small irritation of mine. And I believe that agriculture was the first occupation because they needed food and that needed to be provided, but also because within The laws of nature and the laws that will guide agricultural production are the laws by which business and economics are to be guided. So, for instance, you can't plant anytime you want to and expect a crop. You have to understand that there are seasons that God has created, and you have to work with that. Because if you try to plant in the winter, you won't get anything. You have to plow before you plant. There is a series of steps you have to go through to farm, and you have to know what they are, and you have to obey them, or you don't get a crop. It's just that simple. It is a science. And so you have to plow, you have to sow, you have to wait, and all this work, and you have nothing. And then you have to reap. You don't bring the harvest in, you lose it all. But when you bring the harvest in, you still don't necessarily have any money. You may have something to eat, but you don't have any money. You have to distribute. And what you have grown needs to be needed. And if nobody needs it, you're not going to make anything. So you have to know what is needed. You have to know what the soil will grow. You have to make an investment of time, energy, and money before you ever get any return. And if you make those investments at the wrong times, in the wrong way, you will lose it all. And so we can have a mindset about business that somehow it's magic. I just pray and God tells me and I do it and I make money. Yeah, right. But our mindset about business needs to be exactly the same as farming. It's guided by laws, by sequence, by time, by need, and you better make sure that you've thought it all out carefully, or you will not succeed. It is not magic. It is the application of some very specific principles to the very specific area that when applied properly will work and when applied poorly will not work. So I don't know what to call this yet. I'm asking the business professionals to help me come up with a name and sort of the terms. But within God's economic system, I tell you, it's just like Jesus. He talked about money as much as he did salvation. And the Old Testament has as much about economics and the whole area of work and money as almost any subject there. One of the principles was, as soon as Israel went into the Promised Land, God told them they must own land. They didn't have a choice. You know, they were a nomadic people when they went into Egypt. In Egypt, they didn't own their own land. They used the Pharaoh's land. When they went to the Promised Land, God said, you must fight and take every tribe's land. No tribe may be without land. You must have land, and you must work that land, and you cannot sell that land ever. They could lease it for 50 years, but the land always went back to the family and the tribe. So the right and responsibility to own land was fundamental to their economic understanding. Now, we can't spend time here, but if you know anything about the economies of the world, you will know that the right or the lack of right to own land is one of the fundamental debates, along with how much land the church has in various places. Okay. And God addresses this. He addresses the issue, he addresses the need. The right to ownership of what I have earned. The right to private property is another way to say it. Was fundamental. They not only had the right, they had the responsibility to own and care for material goods. Where do you think thou shalt not steal comes from? If you don't have the right to own anything or nothing belongs to you, thou shalt not steal doesn't really make any sense. Okay. But the right to ownership, the right to use my gifts, to use my energy, to earn and to acquire from that earning was basic to God's teaching to them of how they built an economy. The obligation to work is a whole nother theme. We could write 2 chapters on the work ethic. I had my students color Proverbs because it's a good concrete book to start with. And I said, what did you learn about economics in Proverbs? And in unison they said, you need to work. I said, yeah. They said, we had no idea the Bible emphasized work so much. I said, yeah, and it's not just Proverbs. No work, no eat. Okay. And the Western economies are built on this work ethic, but they no longer practice it. So don't buy a car made by General Motors on Monday or Friday, because they're out of there. Or they're in there hungover, or they're in there on drugs, or they're taking drugs before they go for the weekend. Buy a car from General Motors made on Wednesday, because that's when you have the higher worker productivity. My dad would roll over in his grave at that concept of work, because he was trained that God says work is worship, and if it's worth doing, do it well and work at it. We're losing this, and it will destroy our economy. And it is the key to building an economy in many places. It's not the only key. Live within your means. Don't desire that which you can't afford. Oh, golly, this would sure disciple America. If just the Christians would live within their means, we'd change the whole economy of America. If just the Christians would stop asking the government to pay for more than they have, we could change that in America. Generous lending, the integrity of the borrower. We went through some of this when we looked at that passage. You couldn't go in and take a man's way of making his living to pay back the debt. You had to leave him with the ability to provide for himself and his family. You couldn't just storm into his house and carry off everything that was there. That would be treating a human being as though they had no value. And God never has a system that treats human beings as though they have no value. Limited debt, we talked about. The work ethic. Workers' integrity, that workers have the right to get their pay when they need it. You have no right as a manager to withhold pay because it's more convenient for the company and deprive men and women of what they need. God dealt with this. This is in law called workers' rights. This is why we have to have unions, because we don't practice workers' rights. But God did. He said, you may not treat people who work under you like this. They have earned this money. You need to give it to them. Rather than just thinking about your own convenience and your own system. The gleanings concept, you see, when God wanted to help the poor, He didn't just put a soup kitchen on the corner. When God wanted to help the poor, He spoke to the businessmen and He said, when you plant a field and you harvest it, leave something around the edges and let the widows and the orphans and the poor come and glean the edges of the field. Let them work. Let them do something to provide for themselves. Don't humiliate them and just make them exist on what you're willing to give them. But leave some portion of your profit so that they can come in and work and at least provide the basics of what they need. This is completely the opposite of our concept of mercy aid. We make people feel they have nothing to offer. God wanted them to feel as though there was something they could do to help with their circumstances. And He made the business community part of that by saying, don't glean everything out of this deal you can get. Leave something in a way for people that don't have to access that. American capitalism says, get every dollar out of that sucker you can squeeze out of it. That's why it's not biblical. Not that capitalism can't be biblical. But greed can never be biblical, even if you put it under capitalism. And then stewardship of the environment, and the tie between stewardship of the environment and the economic prosperity is very clear in Scripture. Destroy the environment, destroy your economy. Wow, what a gospel message for the West, huh? Payback time. Okay, we don't have much time. We better go. So what might the business missions mandate be? What might their mission statement be? To provide needed goods and services and gainful employment opportunities for the community at a fair market price and wage. The business community are the providers. What should they provide? What is needed at the highest quality, at the fairest price, while developing their workers to their highest potential, because all their workers are part of God's creation. Building the quality of life. Okay, what else do we have? I think we did all the ones I have on overheads. What am I missing? Let me just go through this list. Family. What does family reveal? Family reveals the Heavenly Father. What is the primary attribute it is to convey? The primary attribute is love and nurture. The family is where we learn love. If we don't learn it there, we spend all of our lives trying to learn it. And we will improve. But if it happens in the family, and family is ruled by the law of love. Let me say this to you guys. God says, husbands, love your wives. And if you obey the law of love, you will have a wife who is faithful to you. Because you see, God has made men and women different. Men don't need to be loved. They need other things. Yeah, you need it, but you don't need it in the same way women do. Women need to be loved. They need to be cherished. And if you love them, God has programmed us to respond. Are you with me? Women only have to obey. Men, you have to love. You are the leader of the family. You have to set the pattern of expressing the kind of love Jesus expresses to the church, to your wife. The love that lays its life down. The love that is more concerned for the other than for itself. The love that seeks only to have the other released. And if you obey that law of love, you will have a good marriage. Because she will respond. Will it be a perfect marriage? Will she be a perfect wife? Will you be a perfect husband? Oh, I seriously doubt it. But you'll have a better rather than a worse marriage. The love that forgives and forgives and forgives. How many times? 70 times 7, as often as needed. You are commanded as husbands to do that. It is an extension of the law of love through you as head of the family. And if you love your wives, and as parents, if you love your children, you will nurture them. And the law of love will produce an environment where we understand what human relationships are supposed to be, because we learn human relationships in the family. We learn how authority is to be executed in the family. And God says authority is to be ruled over by love. So if you come from a culture or a class where it's, I am the husband, I have authority. Well, yeah, but you're going to lose it all because you don't understand how that authority is executed in the family. Because by God's plan, that authority is executed the way He executes authority, and that's through love and service. I don't think it's hard to obey. I'm kind of glad to be a woman because I think obedience is fairly simple. I think love is difficult. You guys got a hard job. But if you do yours, we can do ours. Education. Oh, the mission statement of the family: to provide a safe, nurturing environment for growth, values, and education for the next generation. You are there to provide a safe environment for the growth and the teaching of values to the next generation. You are the key to all the nations. The family unit is the unit whereby the next generation learns their values and how to execute them. Oh my goodness, we're not going to get through. We got one. Okay, we better quit there and not force it. 2 questions for the end of this session. In what domain do you believe you are gifted? In what domain do you believe you are gifted? We're all going to be gifted in family. We have to be. We're made that way. But what other domain are you gifted in? And have you asked God if that is your calling? Number 2, have you asked God if that is your calling?